Hey, this is Zacklog the Great, and I am here tonight with my friend Nate.
Hi again, everybody.
And with Rachel Fulton Brown. Say hello. Hello. Rachel.
I had the echo in the background because I was playing us. I think I've turned it all off now. Okay. Hello.
We are going to talk about C.S. Lewis's poem Wormwood, which, to alleviate some confusion, because I already saw one person who was a little thrown off by this. Wormwood is the name of a character in the Screwtape Letters. Wormwood is also the name of a poem by C.S. Lewis, which is not associated with the Screwtape Letters. Before we go any further, to anyone watching this, if you enjoy this conversation tonight, if you like my work, I recently started a Subscribe-Star page, and if you want to help out, if you want to contribute, if you want to help me keep this going and perhaps do more of this, you could go to subscribestar.com/Zacklog-the-great, and the link is in the description, and I would greatly appreciate any contributions.
So wait, can you explain who Zacklog is? Why? What is Zacklog? You say Wormwood is not the same as Wormwood in the Screwtape. I think Zacklog. That's a very interesting name.
That name I actually came up with at a youth group function when I was like 18 or 19, and they said, go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody and tell them what your middle name is and what your middle name should be. And so I decided my middle name should be Zacklog the Great. And then shortly after that, I was a DJ on my college's radio station, and I started using it there. And that was also around the time I got on the internet where people get to pick their own name, and it just stuck. Interestingly, a friend of mine pointed this out to me. I did not do this deliberately. It is very much like the name of a town in the Bible.
Yes, it has a very biblical sense. So there's
there's a town in the Bible, Ziklag, and I had read that part. So I didn't do that on purpose, but it's possible that that just was rolling around in my head at the time. So, one moment.
Well, as fencing bear, I appreciate that. Yes. Okay.
So,
so fencing bear, sword fighting or building barriers?
Fighting.
Oh, okay. I've done the second one a lot more than the first, but I did go once with a mutual friend of ours who's also a commentator on here.
It's unfortunately his work and school obligations have separated him from us for a while. But one of the people who was a regular here for a good while, Chris,
Chris.
has done a fair bit of fencing. So hopefully, maybe
real fencing, sport fencing, or that historic stuff.
The sport
fencing.
So
that's good.
But
we have you see there's a split in the community, right? It's like us athletes, right? The sport fencers, and we're the ones that worry about it as competition, and the historic fencers they do competitions, I think, but they're also much more into the older forms. You could have a debate about which one's more real.
Yeah, he actually has a number of unusual hobbies, and I decided at one point that he was actually, what tied them all together is he was obviously training to be an assassin.
Aha. Okay.
Because fencing is one of them, and parkour was one of them, which you could use to get into and out of places you're not supposed to be, and like just several others that I thought fit that theme pretty well. The unicycle doesn't. The unicycle doesn't fit that. I am completely serious. He has a unicycle. Anyway, we haven't got to the poem yet. Did we? I don't usually wondering whether we should start that, at least with the ones that aren't 5 minutes. Nate, I don't know. Do you think that adds to it, or can we skip that?
What? Read the poem?
I don't usually assume. I kind of set it up to be a reference to the recording I've already done, but I don't know. Nate, what do you think? Should we read it or just go to the talk?
We can go ahead and read it.
Okay. Rachel, would you like to, or one of us?
I'll read it because we have your recording. Let me see. Let me see what mine is like. Okay, so I understand that the poem. I watched Decalogue. I watched your recording of it, and I think everybody should, since it's a good reading. Mine will be obviously different because I'm actually just reading it, and you've memorized them when you're speaking. That the poem itself comes from the Pilgrim's Regress. So I'm curious about what sort of how you approach it. If it's extracted from the story that it was originally written to be part of. But here's the poem. And it's also being sung on a journey, right? Which I thought was interesting. And Virtue is singing it. I'm not going to sing it. Thou only art alternative to God, O dark and burning island among spirits, 10th hierarch, Wormwood, immortal Satan, Ahriman, alone, second to him to whom no second else were known. Being essential fire, sprung of his fire, but bound within the lightless furnace of thyself, bricked round to range in the reverberated heat from 7 containing walls. Hence power thou hast to rival heaven. Therefore, except the temperance of the eternal love, only thy absolute lust is worth the thinking of. All else is weak disguisings of the wishful heart. All that seemed earth is hell or heaven. God is, thou art, the rest illusion. How should man live save as glass to let the white light without flame, the Father, pass unstained? Or else opaque, molten to thy desire, Venus infernal, starving in the strength of fire. Lord, open not too often my weak eyes to this.
So, not the most cheerful, uplifting subject matter, you might say.
I was so taken aback with a title like Wormwood. I expected, I don't know, fishing?
Well, but he is, I mean, Wormwood, I think it's an interesting title because since in this poem, Wormwood is Satan, and Wormwood it's a kind of comic name for the second to God, and Ahriman, the juxtaposition of Wormwood and Ahriman it seemed to me very interesting. I'm not sure what the poem means actually. I'm curious what you all think it does.
Well I think actually. Sorry, Sean, do you want to take this? All right.
No, go.
It was interesting to me, the title Wormwood, based on kind of revelation. The comet Wormwood will strike the earth and make the waters bitter. And it's talking about this bitter being fallen away from God's grace, right? And so you have a lot of just this very nasty taste of all of it, talking about how aside from God, all there is left is this ultimate evil. You either choose ultimate good or ultimate evil, and everything else is just, as he says, the weak disguising of the wishful heart, right? You're probably serving evil. And so the whole idea is saying that if you take God out of the equation, there is no other balance but ultimate darkness, because Satan will then overcome. And so he's talking about how, Satan is the grand enemy of all good. And said, second only to God in, motive power, I suppose, that moves men. God moves men to good. Satan moves them to evil. And without God, there's only the devil left. And that's, kind of that's really a bone-chilling thought. And so that's why, the last line stands by itself, saying, Lord, open not too often my weak eyes to this.
Well, and there's my main focus with this one, like the big thing I guess I get out of it is kind of focusing on the second half. Because it is, like I said, a description of Satan and his role. And then the second half says, like he said, there's two alternatives. There's God and Satan, and there's not really anything else. And basically every single thing we do here on Earth, we are moving ourselves closer to one or the other. And we are, pushing this world, closer to one or the other. There's almost no, nothing neutral. And there was actually I'd be hard pressed to say where, but there's a book by C.S. Lewis where I remember him saying that basically, like, once we're dead and at our final destination, whichever that is, I suspect we'll look back and, it will almost retroactively take in everything else. Those who are redeemed, those who choose virtue, those who choose to follow God, will look back at their entire earthly life, and everything, even the most confusing and painful things, will be taken into the heavenly life. I guess because it'll make sense then. You'll understand it. You'll understand why all that had to be. And on the other hand, those who, effectively choose hell will end up looking back and find hell having consumed everything, even when they were on Earth.
So, I, inveterate researcher that I am, actually, Lewis gives a rather different sense of the degree to which the devil is the opposite of God. He in the Screw Tape Letters, he has in the preface, he's talking about exactly what what's going on with his sense of what is the devil, right? He says the commonest question is whether I really believe in the devil. And he says, now, if by the devil you mean a power opposite to God and like God, self-existent from all eternity, the answer is certainly no. There is no uncreated being except God. God has no opposite. No being could attain a perfect badness opposite to the perfect goodness of God. For when you have taken away every kind of good thing, intelligence, will, memory, energy, and existence itself, there would be none of him left. The proper question is whether I believe in devils. I do. That is to say, I believe in angels, and I believe that some of these, by the abuse of their free will, have become enemies to God, and as a corollary to us, these we may call devils. They do not differ in nature from good angels, but their nature is depraved. Devil is the opposite of angel, only as bad man is the opposite of good man. Satan, the leader or dictator of devils, is the opposite not of God, but of Michael.
Right, and so you don't, and to say that, like, Satan is the equal and opposite of God would not be Christianity. It would be dualism, which the last active form of that I'm aware of would be Zoroastrianism. And
or Manichaeanism, and I mean Augustine was Manichaean for a long time, so that
we'll see to the Manichaeans.
Yes, that tension between saying evil is it's the opposite of good, as opposed to evil, which Augustine eventually gets to, is the deprivation of good, which is more what Lewis is arguing here, right? It's no being could attain perfect badness, because it couldn't be perfect badness. Perfect, the opposite of God is nothing.
Yeah. The perfect badness, as you said, you lose all of the traits you need to actually get anything done, like intelligence and planning and all that. It's kind of like the whole idea of Bizarro Superman, right? He shouldn't be super strong. Like, it's supposed to be like he's from Bizarro World. He's the complete mirror opposite of Superman, but he's still super strong, right? He's still, he's ugly, he's dumb, but he's still super strong, super fast, all these things. So it's like he's not the mirror opposite. He should be a decrepit husk who is also mentally incapable and all of these things, because that would be the mirror opposite. And so I was going to take that bite later, actually, that, this whole line that says, hence power thou hast to rival heaven. No, not really. Satan is the antagonist of heaven. He's the enemy, sure. But you can be an antagonist without being a rival. I was thinking about this, it says, if the 2019's rightful Super Bowl champions, the New Orleans Saints, played a middle school football team, then, the middle school football team would be the antagonist to the Saints, but they would by no means be rivals. They would be completely outclassed in every form and fashion. Mm-hmm. And that is Satan versus God. He knows he can't overthrow God. He knows that his, rebellion has already been defeated. All he's doing now is this spiteful sort of, guerrilla fighting to try and just deprive God of as many people as he can. He knows he's lost. It's just that how much hurt can he lay down? And so, like I said, he's no rival of heaven. He's an enemy. He's an antagonist, but he's no rival.
Well, I like that Lewis points out that he's Satan's opponent is Michael, right? And you talked about Revelation, and it's like Michael is the one who binds Satan and defeats him. It's interesting that, it seems to me interesting in popular culture that Satan is given more reality in people's imagination than the angels, actually, I don't know enough popular culture. I know there's shows out there that have angels, and that is a show that apparently there's an alumnus from University of Chicago in a show where he plays an angel, and some of my students knew this show fairly well. What reality people give to their understanding of angels versus Satan, and how can you have angels? How can you have a sense of an understanding of reality of angels and devils and not God?
Yeah, you can't. Yeah. You got a lot of interest. You got a lot of really great mental gymnastics trying to do that.
But don't people do it? I bet.
Absolutely. I'm not saying there's some very talented mental gymnasts out there.
Yeah.
Olympic grade mental gymnastics.
I think that's something Chesterton, kind of refers to at one point. He says, if you don't teach theology, you don't end up with people who have no theology. You just end up with people who have bad theology.
You've been reading me. I said that.
Yes. Okay. But I thought you got it from Chester.
I did. I said that in that Sightings article that I wrote about Milo's campus tour, right? And I was saying if you teach no theology, you just get bad theology. But yes, I've read a lot of Chesterton, so it's possible I picked it up from him. But that phrasing was mine. He's claimed to have said is something like, when people stop believing in God, it's not they believe nothing, they believe anything. I think is that the phrasing? That's the phrasing I've heard.
Yeah. Well, and
we talk about that a lot. Go ahead, Sean. Your channel, bud. You do it.
One other thing about angels and devils. If you in popular culture, and this is also something C.S. Lewis points out, and I'd have to dig that up and see how good I think it is. I wrote a poem a few years ago alluding to this idea, but in popular culture, whenever you see angels, you expect them to show up and pat you on the back and say there. In the Bible, whenever angels show up, the first thing they say is, don't be afraid. And
Right.
they have to say that because your natural reaction to meeting one of them is going to be terror.
I'm going to reference a sort of like a meme-based thread I saw, so forgive me. But they're talking about, like, anybody ever think of what angels would look like? And then somebody was like, well, according to different sources in the Bible, they may look like this. And it had the wheels within wheels with eyes all throughout. And it had, like, the head of the man, the eagle, the ox, and the lion on there, the face of them all. They're like, yeah, like, these are from actual, I'm looking at them like pretty faithful renditions. They're like, these are from actual biblical descriptions of angels. That somebody else said, like, so, starting to understand then why their standard line is, the first time they show up on the scene is always "fear not."
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, these guys are crazy looking. It's like almost incomprehensible to the mortal mind.
Well,
yeah,
okay,
and also
so
there's also the thing that if an angel shows up, he's also a very good chance he's not there to pat anybody on the back unless it's with a battle axe. He's like, hey.
Okay, so I think we do need to talk a little bit about the reality of angels. And this I'm teaching a class right now on what I called it medieval Christian mythology, which was my mischievous way of trying to get people to at least think through the more, quote, mythological elements that people like Bultmann have declared unnecessary to Christianity. But of course, one of the problems if you're teaching this as a history course is where does it come from? And since I haven't set it up quite those terms, we can't say. I mean, we've read Dionysius, Pseudo Dionysius on the celestial hierarchy, and there the angels are, of course, in a kind of Neoplatonic way, aspects of the divine, that they're, the each of the 9 orders of angels, the lower angel, the upper angels like the seraphim and cherubim have all of the capacities of the lower 7 orders, so that as you ascend through the ranks, they become sort of more and more sort of purely intelligences and reflections of the divine. But the sort of the problem is, and Nate, what you're describing is what do angels look like? Well, one of the students in my class this week said, well, don't they just look like, actually, maybe I said that, the statues of winged beasts in Assyrian iconography, right? And you're saying, so the scriptural descriptions, particularly Old Testament descriptions of the angels, are coming out of a context in which winged beasts are there in the iconography elsewhere, which of course then puts us in the Zoroastrian territory, right? Since these are in the Near East.
Mm-hmm.
What do we do with that? Because I think, I mean, as Christians, I think there's a reality to the angels and demons that I'm perfectly willing to stand on, but I'm curious about how we address that as a historical question. And since that what Lewis was actually doing in Pilgrim's Regress was trying to rewrite Pilgrim's Progress, but do it from this philosophical level, that he's taking his pilgrim virtue through all of these different philosophical challenges to faith, and that the poem shows up at the point where they've begun the return, right? They finally gotten to the point where all of the philosophies are being shown to be answerable or in fact illusions, right? That the rest illusion, right, is the problem there. And so Lewis himself felt like he had eventually answered, well, how can there be apparently historical reference to things that we would say are spiritual realities, but they don't necessarily appear in the places that we want them to, like they're not only scriptural, and they might seem to have other sources than revelation or actual angels showing up and saying, fear not.
Well, what I would say is that they come from the same place. I mean, a lot of these false gods that these other cultures are worshiping are going to be demons, fallen angels, and so they would retain, I suppose, their resemblance to their loyal brethren. And so when you see them, then you're like, well, these guys are worshiping some kind of winged beast, and here comes one that says he's from God. Are they the same guy? No, they're cousins, right? But Bobo down here has fallen to evil, whereas, you know, the one that God has sent to us is still, you know, he's still a holy messenger. He's still, you know, sort of the force that God sends into earth to do things for us. And so, I mean, it's a case of, you know, the black sheep of the family still looking like the family. And so, given that they're all from the same place, they look the same.
My dog agrees.
Well, see, if you get the dog on your side, you're 3/4 of the way to victory.
Yes.
But the other thing is, like, you, if you ask what do angels look like, well, a couple things. If you ask what do they look like, I'm not sure the answer, like, I'm not sure the answer really means anything, because they aren't, you know, they aren't physical embodied creatures like us. And so if they appear to us, you know, they have to take some form. And I would guess that they'd have some say over that. And so, you know, there are stories in the Bible where it looks like angels, you know, visited someone and they weren't aware of what was going on at first. They thought these were just people. And so, you know, they can take... Sorry?
Lot springs to mind.
Yeah.
When he's in Sodom.
And so they can take, you know, what form they want to a certain extent. The other thing, which I thought was kind of funny, and Rachel might appreciate this as a medievalist. If I am correct, I don't know if you know about this. I don't know if you know this. I seem to remember someone referencing Thomas Aquinas saying that each angel is sufficiently different from one another that each one would have to be considered its own species.
Yes. So what today's meditation on the poem is reinforcing for me is I need to do a lot more study of angels. My favorite line about this right now is my son, who is a mathematician, was actually reading Pseudo Dionysius at one point, and he came back and was telling me about how it was all like mathematical forms and such. And I said, well, okay, you know, read some Aquinas in this essay by Rainey Daston on, it's in a book on animal intelligences, and she's meditating on this. Modern philosophers often do sort of thought experiments about what would it be like to be a bat, right? That's the famous Thomas Nagel essay, where you're imagining yourself into the dog's consciousness. What does she think? Whereas in the 13th century scholastics, they do worry about animals, right? Albertus Magnus is commenting on Aristotle's animal treatises, but they worry a lot about angels and the long meditations on them. When my son, the mathematician, reads them, he says, you know, basically, he gave me a copy of Aquinas's questions on angels and said for Christmas this year, and he says, I'm afraid I gave you a math book. So I think I do think I need to. It's the one aspect of Christianity and Christian mythology that I haven't really studied properly or thought through. I've thought a lot about the incarnation. I've thought a lot about Mary. I've thought a little bit about the Trinity, and prayer and engagement with God through the saints. But the angels are eluding me, and I'm curious why they're so hard to think about when clearly people like Aquinas found them very productive to think with.
I don't have anything there.
Well, okay, so what Lewis said, and this is the next paragraph, talking about what they look like. He says, devils are depicted with bats' wings and good angels with birds' wings, not because anyone holds that moral deterioration would be likely to turn feathers into membrane, but because most men like birds better than bats. So we could have bat-wing angels if you like bats, I guess. They're given wings at all in order to suggest the swiftness of unimpeded intellectual energy. They are given human form because man is the only rational creature we know. Creatures higher in the natural order than ourselves, either incorporeal or animating bodies of a sort we cannot experience, must be represented symbolically if they are to be represented at all. But then, of course, there's a footnote in my edition of the Screwtape Letters, because it's like annotated and such, saying that Lewis, of course, plays with representing the planetary angels in his space trilogy, so that he does end up giving the Eldila some kind of form. It's hard to think angels without giving them some physical representation.
Well, and also in that context, it's a fictional story, and like if you're describing something that people aren't familiar with, you want to give them a picture. And in that one, it was, I believe, the creatures, at least analogous to angels, appeared to Ransom in a form something like a beam of light that was it was at an odd angle from the earth, but the narrator, oh, that's right, it was Ransom's friend at the beginning of Paralandra, said that he had the oddest sensation when he looked at it, that it was not the angel that was at an odd angle, but his position on the earth, and that the angel was correctly oriented to something much more foundational than him, and so he felt looking at this like he was standing sideways. Well,
and then liturgically, the one place I have sort of thought about angels is, of course, in the Mass. The Mass is offered in the company of the angels and archangels, right? And the Holy, Holy, Holy is the song that the celestial beings sing before the throne of God. So I like that, so the orientation should always be towards God, and if you're not oriented towards God, you're at odds, at odd angles. That makes sense.
And to drag that right back into the poem, what I was thinking is, how should man live save as glass, to let the white light without flame the Father pass, unstained or else opaque, molten to thy desire, speaking of Satan, Venus infernal, starving in the strength of fire, right? If we try and refract or split up, the nature and the message of God, we end up bending it to our own ends and serving Satan. We have to let God work through us, unchallenged, right? We can't allow ourselves to try and, shave off or, manipulate God's will, because one, that's like me getting out a pair of pliers and trying to spin the planet back a couple of notches. And two, it will, ultimately it will corrupt us. It's kind of like the focusing lens for a laser, right? If you have it set up right, you're good, and you'll get a very productive thing out of it, and, power and all of that. But if you, click it to the side, knock it off, then suddenly the energy just gets pent up, and boom, you get destruction of, what you were trying to do, and probably yourself.
But we are also called on to act and to make choices. That's I now can't remember where I was reading that in Lewis, but
no, that's absolutely true.
That's the whole, the whole point in the Screwtape Letters with Wormwood's acting on the patient is, and I recognize that this is, so I don't know what flavor of Christians you guys are. Having grown up Presbyterian, and now being Catholic and being basically medievalist, I have no idea what flavor I am, except I really concentrate on Mary a lot. That became in the 16th century the great question of, the degree to which the will can actually act at all on its own strength in turning it all to God. And yet, the idea that we are made free gives us a certain kind of responsibility to try, even though it's only with grace that we're able to. And that mystery of the degree to which you say we should be like glass. And I like that you point that image out, Nate, that we should be like glass and allow God to shine through us. And that's one of the great images of Mary, that she is the crystal through whom God shined forth into the world and becoming incarnate. Right. But there's that moment when the angel comes to her, when Gabriel comes to her, And actually, he doesn't say fear not. It's like, doesn't he just say hail?
Actually, he just rolls up to her. He rolls up on her and just like, Mary, hey!
Mary, I'm here.
Well, I
And
mean,
she's like,
if you believe the teachings of the Catholic Church, Mary was sinless, and so what would inspire fear in most of us is probably has something to do with the fact that we are not, that there are a lot of things wrong with us, and we kind of know it. And if we're confronted with a direct messenger from God, that's going to kind of highlight all those things. And, and fear is probably going to be your first, for a sane person's first response.
But
well, that speaks well to Our Lady then, that she is like, oh, but what I was going with was that Gabriel comes to her and says, you're going to have the Son of the Most High, and she says, how shall this be? And that it's very important theologically that there is that moment when she is able to give consent before she conceives, and that even as as pure and as perfect as she is, and already aligned with the will of God, in the at least medieval understanding gives her that moment to say yes.
Yeah,
well, and
that's the thing. You have to. There is a call to action. You do have to act. I mean, God's not just going to do this all himself.
Right.
He could, obviously. It's well within the capabilities of the omnipotent Creator. But He has given the responsibility into our hands, and so while you want to be the perfect lens for God, in the end, it's known that you're not going to. You're going to make a mess of it. But the whole reason that you meditate on the Scripture and you gather together to receive instruction from your priest, if you're one of the liturgical denominations, or with your pastors and all of that, is so that you can better understand and better align yourself with the light of God to more truly transmit His power into the world through your actions. And so that's where the study of the Word, the meditation, and all of these things, and the refining of yourself has to happen, because you have to have that purity, and you have to have that alignment with the will of God. And if you don't know Him, you can't align with Him. And so, like I said, it's understood we're going to mess it up to some extent. We're going to do something wrong. We're going to do a lot of things wrong. But that's why grace is so very important, because, when our imperfect self is struck by the power of God, to transmit through, we're not, knocked stone dead like the high priest might have been. We're, we're saved. Thank God.
Well, and the other thing is, it's kind of I actually saw someone like an atheist who was a bit frustrated with the idea that our goal is, like, God gave us free will, but wants us to surrender it to Him. And he's like, well, then why did? But it is kind of a strange paradox that, like, we were given this, and the goal is that we freely will to let His to give Him, to let His will be done through us. And at the same time, the other part of that, as this poem, as like I said earlier, the latter half of this poem points out, you can let God act through you. Like, you're going to have a master. You can choose to serve God, or you can choose to serve Satan. Not a lot of people explicitly do that, but if you think you're serving yourself, you're actually serving Satan.
I'd like to go there, right? Not to serve Satan, but so the angel shows up, right? And I think we've evoked quite powerfully that moment of, okay, an angel shows up, and we were talking about, Nate, you were suggesting it's like, if demons can show up, and bat wings or bird wings, who knows, right? But if one of these beings angels show up and say, fear not, right? Because you're likely to be terribly afraid. When demons show up, what do they say? And I don't think they say fear not, right? And you should be afraid of them. But if they're tricky, like Wormwood, I mean, it's like you expect the satanic to reveal itself as satanic. And certainly, thanks to Goethe and Mephistopheles, and whatever Faust was up to, that we have this image of the devil as the suave, sophisticated, which he probably is, but the
he was beautiful.
But the tempter is going to promise all sorts of really good things first.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I doubt he's going to come talking about fear. He's going to probably come talking about a relief from things like fear, a relief from things like worry. He's going to say, hey, let me help you with your problems. He's going to speak on, and the angels, tended to be the guys saying, thus saith the Lord, whereas, the demons are just going to say, let me talk to you.
Mm-hmm.
So they're not going to come with a message. They're not going to come with a word from God. They're just going to come with an idea. They're going to come with what looks like an opportunity. And it's going to be tempting. It's what they do. And they're very, very good at it.
And it's also, and the other thing, and I hadn't thought about this before, is that, the angels may, disguise themselves for a purpose, for something, but they aren't actually going to lie, or they shouldn't actually lie. Whereas
I don't think the angels disguise themselves. I think they just come, and that's why you're so terrified properly.
Well, no,
right?
But I mean, like I said, there are in the Bible places where, people are apparently talking to angels and aren't aware of it for a good while. And so
when Abraham is talking to the angels.
Yeah, and there are other places where I'd have to look.
It depends on if they're coming in glory or not. Are they coming, as the divine messenger, or are they coming to sort of search out the place? Again, Lot and Sodom, right?
Hebrews.
They came down to look for the righteous men in Sodom, and they met Lot, and they literally walk up to him, and he's like, "Hey guys, what's going on?" And he doesn't realize for a while what's up, and then he's like, "Oh, wait a minute."
Well,
and so they obviously came as men. It's stated outright.
And in Hebrews, it says, some of you, may have entertained angels unawares.
Okay. Okay.
And so, but at the same time, they're not actually going to lie. They're not going to present themselves, as the opposite of what they are. Whereas that's exactly the point of what a devil is going to do. He's going to, conceal everything about his true nature that he can. I don't know if I'm making sense.
Yes, you are. And the thing is, I think this is actually like current events always, right? Seriously, the degree to which, and I think, so we're doing this online, right? And, with the obvious hope of having a few people watch, and the temptation always of wanting to win the world, right? Wanting to win over, I've been playing this game a little bit on, in the social media, and obviously it's lovely having people that are willing to listen to you and to take on your ideas and tell you you're smart, and that's fun. But there's a lot of temptation out there, which is to say you will be like gods, which is always the promise. That's the first promise that the serpent makes, and it's always, always, always the promise. You will be in control in some way, right? I will give you this ability to sway your listeners. I will give you this ability to. You will be like gods, and then of course the temptation that the devil gives Jesus in the desert of you will have all material comforts that you want. turn these stones into bread. You can do it. You will have all the support that you need, right? And throw yourself down from the temple. The angels will catch you, right? There'll be nothing that can hurt you. You'll be invincible. You will be able to rule the world, right? It's so interesting to me that those temptations are just encapsulated all. Right? There's not many other things that people want. Maybe, I don't know, sex, but that's a
material comfort again.
Promise of material comfort, promise of absolute invulnerability, and promise of dominion.
Well, the thing is that Satan always strikes a bargain for your eternity with your temporality. Hey, I'll give you a good life on this earth. Yeah, but that's the small part.
Well, and the other thing I was just thinking about this.
Another pony with a dog.
The other.
Do you want to hear her?
I was thinking about.
She can talk or not.
No, we're fine.
The other thing I was thinking about this is even if you look at how less elevated or I guess descended conmen work, if it's not too silly to talk about demons as conmen, people who are trying to subvert your will, people who are trying to trick you, to get you to do things that that will harm you. There's probably two things that they primarily want to play on. Maybe three. Two, but the top two ones, they might want you to be afraid. Hey, if you don't act soon, this horrible thing is going to happen to you, but I know how to get you out of that. So they want you to be afraid, or they want to play on greed and make you think you're taking them for a ride, or this is definitely more effective on guys, sexual desire. If you want a guy to do something stupid, put a pretty woman in front of him. But to return to the first one, the angels
I promise not to worry. I promise not to lead you guys astray.
But the first thing the angels do when they show up, even if they're natural, even if their supernatural appearance would the usual response would be terror. They say, don't be afraid.
Right.
Fear is not the state of mind you need here, because they want you to act freely. They want you to act of your own will. They're not trying to fool you into following them.
So exactly like when yes, and what the way you're describing them as conmen, that's of course the way Lewis sets up Screwtape and Wormwood in the Screwtape letters. That whereas in the poem, there's the immortal Satan, Ahriman, second to him, to whom no one else was known, be innocent. All that's very grand, right? It's the high version of who Satan was before he fell. But in Screwtape letters, it's at that level of those little cons, right? These little nudges that Screwtape is trying to get Wormwood to give to the patient, so that he just doubts. Right, he doubts whether or not his prayer is appropriate. He doubts, he always. I mean, I think for most people now, I mean, obviously, particularly in the context in which I operate in academia, the greatest temptation is to is the fear of being thought naive or foolish, right? And particularly in faith, right? And Wormwood is being instructed on working on the patient with that, right? You don't want to be thought less than sophisticated by the world. And obviously that one is one that Lewis himself knew well, being in academia.
On the subject of sophistication, it bothers me, all right? You can be educated without trying to be sophisticated, and I would point out to people who are listening and value sophistication. A brick is not sophisticated, yet it is what built the entire world.
Well, and the Well, and the other thing is,
Bill Bryson in At Home has a really great chapter on bricks. They're fascinating.
well, and the other thing with sophistication, if you know a little bit about etymology, the sophists were the people that Socrates spent half of his career mocking and pulling to pieces. And so, the being able to speak out of both sides of your mouth and being intellectually slick, does not necessarily demonstrate any particular virtue. One thing I was thinking, and both of you were kind of saying things related to this just a bit ago. There's a strange dichotomy in Christian thinking about demons, about the demonic, the diabolical, and you kind of have to keep both of these things in mind at once. At the same time, they are fallen, they are defeated, they are the battle was won on the cross, and so we shouldn't fear them. But at the same time, to act like there's nothing there, to act like there's nothing to worry about, to act like to have a certain arrogance about it, that's a bad move too. You have to, you can't attribute, Christianity is not dualism. Satan is not, where we started. Satan is not the opposite number of God. Satan is a creature of God's, corrupted, and he may be the most powerful of the corrupted creatures of God, but he is still, an immeasurably lesser being. At the same time, a corrupted and diminished angel, and that was something someone pointed out talking about this on a comment board earlier, talking about this poem, that in the course of the fall, and I don't know who he was referring to, but he said the demons, in the course of their corruption, they lost a lot of their power because you can't rebel against your source and retain your being intact. And so, even corrupted and diminished angels are still significantly more than one of us. And the only reason we can have any confidence in opposing them is in God's grace and acting in God's will, which is, also another reason why, things like witchcraft are, to say the least, quite stupid, because you are
yes,
because
but
you are playing.
Okay. That came up again in this course that I'm teaching, which I invite everyone to visit the blog. The students are doing very interesting reflections on it. In the discussion on angels, one of the texts that I assigned for them to look at was this Sworn Book of Honorius, which you can find online at esoterica.net or something like that. And the sort of temptation there is that that it's good magic somehow to be summoning these angels, to be conjuring them so that they, can perform magic for you. And the sense that, magic is neutral, actually no, right? Because magic in proper medieval terms is conjuring spirits, and conjuring a spirit, the only spirits that you can conjure and bind are demons. So even if you've decided, even if you're telling yourself that it's a good thing that you can work magic, literally the only ones, the non-fallen angels cannot be bound. So the only way you're only going to get the bad kind.
They're bound to God. You're not going to overcome that servitude. They're not going to swap loyalties to you, then go back to God. To be disloyal to God is to be a demon, like that.
And there's two things with that. One is that you you know, regardless of what someone is doing, you know, very few people, I'm setting out to do evil. Like that's
No,
not
exactly. Nobody. This is so. Vox was actually talking about this in his stream with Owen. Saying when he's talking with Umberto Eco about the librarian in The Name of the Rose, and Vox said something about, oh, he's the villain, and Eco says no. In his terms, he's the good guy. Right, Jorge Borgos is saving the monastery and the world from, you know, blasphemy and laughter, right? Because he thinks it's inappropriate for people to laugh, and that sense of the villain always thinks he's the good guy, and I think that's in the poem too, right? It's like this sense of who's the bad guy, and Satan thinks, of course, God's the enemy, right? God is the bad guy.
Well, and the other thing with that is like if you think you're summoning angels, or rather if you think you're summoning, you know, good angels, uncorrupted angels, a bad angel will be quite happy to show up and, you know, play along to the part you think you're doing. And the other thing is, you know, it's, you know, you said, and I don't know like what medieval. I'm assuming you're referring to like medieval text, medieval like theology on this. Like, you know, you said you can only, you know, you can only summon and bind, you know, the bad angels, the, you know, corrupted spirits. I'm not even sure you're doing that. They're just happy to let. I suspect they're happy to let you think you're doing that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the magic,
like
I mean, the angel magic is all, this is what this Sworn book is so interesting, right? Because it premises itself as being good, right? But even as you read it, you realize, you know, eventually you're doing magic, right? You're doing spells that will bind other wills. And the one great thing that Tolkien is able to demonstrate in his legendarium is evil is the desire to dominate others' wills. That's what the ring does. That's what all of, you know, evil is essentially depriving someone else of free will. So another rational soul of free will. And so the angel magic, even when people think it's good for good, right? And for illumination, for understanding, for knowledge, you know, that's where Goethe got Faust right. It's like, as soon as you've made the bargain for all of those things with Satan, you're done.
Mm-hmm. And what Shaw was saying, you know, is that, you know, it's tempting to think that, you know, these guys are defeated, they're beaten, you know, Jesus already did all this. Yeah. I mean, we have been given the power through the Spirit of God, but it's through the Spirit of God. You know, me as Nate, I have nothing, right? I have nothing with which to contend against these spiritual entities. I can fight a person, probably still not likely to do that much to them, but hey, you know, but I can fight a person by my own resources. I cannot fight a demon by my own resources. I can't touch him. I don't know where he is. You know, I can be like, there's something awful squirrely going on around these parts, but I can't, you know, reach out with my hand and be like, ah, you spirit, get out, and choke slam him back to hell like the Undertaker. You know,
actually, you can. There's a very quick way you can do it. You know how?
Hit me. Exactly. That is invoking the Spirit of God, you know, which dwells inside of us, and you know, those of us who are redeemed carry that power with us, and through that we could say, you know, in the name of God, get.
But it does work, right?
Yeah, it does.
You cross yourself, and the demons flee, right?
Exactly.
And you say the name of God, our Lord Jesus Christ. The demons hate that name.
Absolutely. Because, I mean, he went down to their turf, beat the snot out of them, and took all their power. Yes.
Which they never had. But it, I mean, I have been thinking about that indeed, if you are under assault, it's very interesting if you simply make the sign of the cross and invoke the name of our Lord, you're better already, right? Because if you're under assault, the demons have been it's like gnats, right? That sort of cloud of gnats that are around you, and you do this, and they hate it.
Well, and the other thing, to refer to something you just said, he took their power, which they never had. But and I don't think, I think this is, at least, in line with Orthodox Christian theology. Maybe I don't think I'm going crazy here. I could, I hope someone slaps me back in line if I am wrong. But, part of, according as I understand it, part of what happened in the Garden of Eden is, God had said to man, "Here, this place is yours. You take care of it. It's under your control. It's under your charge." And then when Eve, followed by Adam, chose to break God's rules, chose to take the bite. Effectively, we took the authority that was given to us and we handed it over to Satan. And God gave us authority over this earth, and he meant it. And so if we did something stupid with it, he wasn't retracting it just based on that. And so they kind of do, especially if we are in sin, they definitely will have power over us. But that's because we've given them that. We have placed ourselves in their power by choosing not to follow God's will.
Right, we give them the power.
There's at least once, and I think maybe more than once, where Satan is referred to as the god of this world. Not to say that he is the supreme arbiter, but on this planet, in this physical sphere, he had the authority until Jesus took it from him. And unless we, and he's more than happy to do judo and let us speak things and believe things and do things to give the power, to use that power again. But when we oppose him through the Spirit, then that power has been taken away. It's been stripped, and now it just thunders down on him, and he can do nothing. But what you're saying, and the point I was getting at, kind of in my roundabout way earlier, is that you can't discount the action of demons just because you can beat them.
Right.
To go back to my football analogy earlier, if you never take the field, the other team wins. You have to be out there. You have to be fighting, and you have to be ready to do what is necessary. You have to stand. Sometimes that's all you have to do. Sometimes you have to get in there and fight, and God will tell you when and how. But spiritual warfare is not a lost thing. It's not something for the past. It's not something that died with the apostles. That's something that goes on to this very day. And right now, I feel like the demons are winning because people don't want to think about it. They're like, oh no, grace, 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 love, 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 money, 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 grace, grace, grace. No judgment ever, except for there is.
Yeah, that's actually kind of something I did holiness? That's kind of something, reminds me of something I did another video on some time ago. Title, actually, now that I think about it, it's kind of lousy, but I titled it "No More Mr. Nice Guy," and my point was, well, there were two related points. Nice is not the same as good,
right?
True.
And love is not the same as warm, fuzzy feelings. And it seems to me like far too many Christians today, like the world in general, absolutely, and even a lot of Christians have mistaken not good for nice and think we're just supposed to be
nice. No, you're right. And a friend of mine, Ulrich Lehner, did a book called "God Is Not Nice." He's a professor at Marquette, although moving to Notre Dame, I understand. Specifically to counter that, right? It's like, where do we get this idea that God's nice? God's not nice. Nice is, is never saying you're doing something wrong, right? And that's ridiculous.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's
I mean, the people that contend that God is nice have clearly not read the Old Testament.
Well,
Clearly.
even that, they haven't read the New Testament either.
No, that's true.
They really haven't paid very much
Matthew,
attention to Jesus.
Matthew chapter 23. Have you ever read Matthew chapter 23? Not especially nice.
I mean, have you read the one where Paul strikes a guy, like has God strike a guy blind because he's talking a bunch of crap and kind of like doing spoiling attacks on Paul's message to this pre-consul, and he's like, you over there, shut up, sit down, you're not going to see anything for a while, people are going to lead you by your hand in darkness. Back to what I was saying, and the guys are like, I can't see.
We could make an interesting argument here where the devil is going around saying you should be nice to people. That problem of whatever it is, we're typically, those of us who end up in the politically incorrect side of things, that's that pressure. Like, you should never say anything that upsets people, and it's like, well, then you're never going to say something like that is a bad thing to do, or that obviously it's easy for one. Some people in the conversation to cast blame on each other, on others, but the sense of morality depends on knowing the good and avoiding the evil and resisting the evil. And if you can't even know that, if you're worrying about simply never judging people, you have nothing left.
Exactly.
I think I've lost that argument there.
Yeah. If you never say anything to upset people, you will never say anything to change people.
Mm-hmm. That's
right?
better. Yes, teachers need to be able to say, you need to improve on this, right? And it hurts when people aren't immediately praised.
I'm having to teach my son right now, and it almost derailed our little meeting here, that no, what you want is not what's important. What you need is important. You need to go to bed. You need to sleep. Otherwise, you're going to be very, very tired in the morning, and you're going to have a crappy day. And then mommy and daddy are going to have to stick you upside down in the trash can. We don't actually do that. It's hyperbole.
Well, but I used to have things trying to convince my son not to do this or that, and he'd sort of say why, and I'm like, well, blah blah blah, and always end up because you'll die, right? And so eventually we just short circuited it to mommy logic, and mommy logic is don't do that because you'll die. You could try that. I don't know whether that works for dads.
I can take the simplifications. No, he'll want to know what's going to kill me, and I'll be like, me. It's Daddy.
Well, and that's, you get that image of the Father, the God the Father. God, I mean, Jesus is the judge, right? He's supposed to sit in judgment. That God will, there was an interesting discussion recently on social media about does God love the devil, right? And there were differences of opinion.
Of course he does.
I said yes, and then others said no. He hates the devil because the devil's evil. But I was like, no, the devil is his creature. It's just
he hates what the devil does. It's just like any other. The devil is like any other sinner to God, right? We as we've discussed, we give him too much credit. But the devil is any other sinner to God. God loves him. If he would come back to God, I suppose, I can't really back up scripturally, but given the nature of God, he may be forgiven. It's just that the devil's pride is such that he will not. Mm-hmm. The devil is the one that hates. God simply dispenses justice. And God is going to dispense justice on Satan just like he will you and I if we walk away. Okay? So God does not hate sinners. God hates sin. He hates the thing that separates you from him. And that is where God's hatred comes in. That is why God's hatred is holy. And that is why condemning sin is not hate. We're not saying that you yourself, your soul, your spirit are awful. We are saying that what you do with the gift of life that is given you is reprehensible and will be condemned by the laws of God. Please stop. Please come back where you can be cleansed and return to the grace of God. You never depart from God's love, but you can't walk out from under his grace. And at that point, watch out for falling swords.
And this question actually reminds me of something I've seen come up a few times on Vox Day's blog, which is one of his more, well, at least among Christians, one of his more controversial opinions. And he says, what ought a good person, what ought a Christian feel towards the wicked?
Mm-hmm.
And he says that if you look through the Bible, if you look at that term, it says we are to hate the wicked. And he says, like, I don't know, I've never seen him actually like put what line is crossed that differentiates a failed person, a failing person and a sinner from someone who is actively wicked. Which I would be interested in seeing what he would say on that. But
we could try to get him to watch this and see whether he'll say he doesn't watch videos. What I am interested in I've been reading some of his fantasy books, and I'm interested in the degree to which he is, for example, in the Last Witch King, in fact, trying to understand what evil actually behaves like, right? And the Last Witch King is it was truly terrifying, because we were talking about demons, right? The Witch King becomes the Witch King by summoning a demon and having wolf babies with it or something. It's very odd. But there's trying to tell the strange thing. It's odd, but and recognizing the Witch King means, like in the Witch Kings from the Lord of the Rings, right? The last Witch King of Angmar, whom Eowyn and Merry together managed to kill, or whatever, not kill. You can't kill the undead, but anyway, that the what it's like from evil's perspective is something that Vox has, I think, actually tried to explore fairly carefully. But on the other hand, what you're asking, Zachlog, is indeed where's the line between saying you've crossed so far over into it that you are basically evil, versus sinners who are fallen into sin, but always the possibility of redemption is always there.
Well, and there's even the question, like from a Christian perspective, like is that a judgment we're supposed? Because basically, kind of the question is that a judgment we're supposed to even try to make?
No, because we're not the judge.
That a line, right? And so, yeah,
I respectfully disagree to an extent. I will say there is a line beyond which God does not forgive, and that is to, use the name of the Lord in vain. And I heard it explained in a way that I thought made a lot more sense than what you think of it as. A lot of people think it's like going, oh, well, God bleep it, or something like that. Like, that's taking the name of the Lord in vain. That's not forgivable. God can forgive me for killing you in cold blood. He can forgive me for cursing. What it is doing evil in the name of the Lord, where you do something that is categorically against the command of God, while saying, God has sent me to do this. Like the people, for instance, trying to make abortion a moral argument, saying that, no, it's like, no, y'all are definitely treading into unforgivable territory. And I would say at that point, when the person rises up and says, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob has sent me to murder your children. He sent me to kill them in the womb. That, okay, at that point, you have gone into wicked. If you're trying to say that God has sent me to tell you to worship Satan,
yes,
like
no,
that.
I accept that. I think that's a good interpretation of what that means, because it means to say you are claiming to act in God's name for evil.
Well, and that's actually one thing I find interesting about looking at certain modern perspectives on the left from people who say they are both Christian and, politically on the left, and specifically on a lot of cultural issues. It's like, abortion, homosexuality, whichever of these, like, okay, the entire church up until the 20th century was very clear on these, okay? And not only was clear on these issues, but said, this is what God says for us. This is what God teaches. Literally the entire Christian church up until the 20th century was breaking the second commandment, was using God's name to teach something that God didn't say, or you're wrong.
Well, but that's modernity, right? And it's like I've mentioned, we've Faust, right? That Goethe's poem or play is about the temptation that we've been talking about, that Satan comes and promises control, right? And yes, I mean, of course, people now are going to be saying, "Oh, we can." I mean, eugenics is the worst control, the worst claim of control, right? But we can control our experience to the degree that we are now gods, right? And so, yes, the people that are promoting abortion as a good have. I become speechless when I think about that in terms of the arguments that have been made in the past month or so, to the degree that it's a woman's right to be always able to, even when the baby's been born. I mean, how have we even gotten to a place politically where that's sayable? It's amazing.
See, I'm not struck speechless, but the things that I would say would probably end me up on about all the watch list. So I'm just going to leave it alone for now. Write me a letter, and I'll reply to you with my ideas.
So what are we going to come to a conclusion here, right? It's like, I think we're just going to...
Yeah, we are going to have to wrap this up before too long. We're approaching an hour and a half. But one other thing...
The problem we're running into is that we're talking about a poem that broaches the subject of ultimate evil, and we're living in a time where apparently there is such a surfeit of evil that it makes conversation on the topic trivial to maintain, which is damn depressing.
The other thing is, like, if you know anything about history and pre-Christian societies, that idea in a lot of them would have been perfectly normal.
Infanticide, yes.
Oh, yeah. Oh, you have a kid that there's, he has a bad leg. Yeah, take him over to that spot over there, and you're just going to abandon him, and he's going to die. And early Christians actually would go to these places and save these kids. But the thing is, and as Christianity has been eroded in the West to, like, okay, not just spiritual, like, to our very real physical peril.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, but as Christianity has been eroded in the West, some of these ideas are coming back, and the really scary thing about that is you can't, once you've, like, okay, it was bad when the Romans did that, right? But a better morality had not been shown. A higher standard was not yet in place. Once that higher standard was there, like, you can't just go back. You can't just rewind. It's if they go back to that other standard, it's not just going to be that bad. It's going to be much, much worse. And I don't know. I don't know where to go from there.
Well, so what our discussion is now is inspired me to do is finish rereading The Pilgrim's Regress, because the poem actually comes at the point where they're just turning back from the edge, as it were, and that we're going to work back through the vices of pride and ignorance and lust. There's more poems. They meet the dragon. It's been a very long time since I read all of this, and I think I didn't appreciate what Lewis was doing properly. I'm much more of a Tolkien girl than I am a Lewis lady, but you persuaded me that I should go back and consider him a bit more deeply again.
Well, and there's another one I did from there, which is just terrifying to me when I think about it. Well, I think it's also from the Pilgrim's Regress. Nearly they stood who fall.
Oof.
And we talked about that one. And
yeah, I think we talked about that for like 2 hours. We took forever.
Okay.
Okay, so what I will say, I suppose my closing anyway, because after this I'm pretty much spent, other than anger, is that
we got to end it with a prayer then.
Yeah, really need to. Based on where we've trod tonight. But the whole idea is that these people claim to be making a better world, right? And it falls straight in to the second to last line of the poem. Venus infernal, starving in the strength of fire, right? Venus, right? The goddess of beauty. You know, this vision of rapture, this perfect form. Infernal. It is the twisted version. And so I guess the problem is that so many people have spent all this time, our modern society has spent all this time gazing into this infernal fire, seeing its version of beauty that they've never looked up. You know, they're starving in the strength of fire. They're wasting away. And if they would align to something better, that, you know, the light could pass through and it wouldn't burn them. But no, they want to look at the twisted version of beauty. And I guess I said, and that's our mission, is to turn them to true beauty, turn them away from the infernal Venus and show them the actual form of good and, you know, the true light, not the ruddy flame that, you know, draws their eye, but the white, clear, guiding star that comes down from, you know, from an unknowable height.
Let's see. There was one other. Oh, well. Did you have any last thoughts, Rachel?
I think that's a lovely last thought to end on.
Well, let's see. Nate, would you like to say a prayer, and then I think I'll close us out with St. Michael's.
Sure. Mighty God in heaven, I thank you that we have been able to meet, you know, our minds together, not our bodies. And Lord, thank you for the miracles that allow these things to happen, Lord, because truly, it's what it is. Lord, that you have allowed human minds and human hands to craft these things and to come up with these ideas that allow such a gathering, Lord. And Lord, as we go forth from here, help us to bear in mind your standard. Help us to attune ourselves to your light, Lord, to better transmit it to a darkened world, Lord, that perhaps through us the flash of your brilliance would turn the heads of those who have been ensnared and bewitched by by this modern age and the infernal Venus, as Lewis so eloquently put it. I'm going to pray that as we go about your work and your warfare, Lord, that we do not let go of the righteous indignation that motivates the defeat of evil, but Lord, that we don't allow it to consume us to the point that we do evil in your name. Lord, help us always to find the balance in your holiness and your justice, but also in your mercy and grace and your love. Help us to be great warriors for you and great builders of your kingdom. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Saint Michael the Archangel, be our defender in battle. Protect us against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits that prowl the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
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 All right. Thank you both for joining me tonight, and I will be closing out the stream. God be with you.